The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. It's Friday, October 11th, 2024. Here this week, breaking down the what's up with the news and why that matters to you. Two reporters and an editor, Sten Spinella from the Berkshire Eagle, independent journalist Sarah Robertson, and Elizabeth Roman, NEPM's managing editor of news. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning. Later today, we're talking about pushback and protests. Here on the Rundown, details of the pushback on proposed plans to use the Connecticut River for hydropower for another 50 years, and protest related to people without a clear path to homes in Northampton. Have a thing or two to say about what you're hearing here today? Email the rundown at nepm.org. That's the rundown at nepm.org. Sten Spinella, you're there on the phone. We're going to talk about your reporting and Heather Bellows reporting for the Berkshire Eagle about trees and forest management, which are sparking controversy in at least three areas in the Berkshires. We've got in North County, Notch Reservoir, and in South County, Mount Washington and October Mountain Forests. The headline on your story, Sten, that dropped last week was critics take to the streets to protest forest stewardship plans around Notch Reservoir and Bellows Pipe Trail in North Adams. Now, for some quick context here, the Notch Reservoir is a water source that supplies North Adams and some surrounding communities, and then the Bellows Pipe Trail in nearby Adams is at times this steep, tree-shrouded incline that connects outdoor enthusiasts to the state's highest peak, Mount Greylock. To quote you, Sten, the close of a public comment period, October 1st, on a forest stewardship plan for Notch Reservoir did not exactly quiet voices of dissent. Sten, why does the city say that this plan is needed?
Hey, Carrie, thanks. Well, as for the motivation for municipalities, I mean, they aren't in line for a lot of money that's going to come from the logging in these plans. It's kind of a drop in the bucket. They're essentially saying, hey, this is good for forests, and the state is doing all the legwork for us. What the state is referring to as these climate stewardship plans, or basically coordinated attempts to tackle invasive species and cut some trees, they're meant to help the land and help curb the effects of climate change. So you've got those three similar projects that you gave the background on perfectly. There's two common threads in those projects that I want to talk about briefly. They pit locals and climate scientist allies these locals have found against the town, city, and state. One is the use of different kinds of herbicide. The response to that was so negative in North Adams that the city removed it from the plan.
Yeah, the protesters were very successful in that measure.
Exactly. But critics are still up in arms in South County because at Mount Washington, a kind of herbicide has already been used and there's potential for future use. And then you have this second thread, which is a scientific debate playing out about whether it's more advantageous to log dead trees, releasing carbon into the atmosphere, but ultimately improving the diversity and strength of the forest in the long run, or to not cut at all. And you have Mass Audubon ecologists saying young trees are best for sequestering carbon, but opponents of the plan say permanent protection of the trees is the best way to go.
Yeah, and that was fascinating for me in reading both your and Heather Bellows' reporting, was this aspect of two groups of people who really both have the climate and nature at the heart. They're really fighting for what they feel is best for the environment, but we're in a real pickle here because there's some solid disagreement. Also, though, yeah. I want to bring in this third leg of this stool that, as I see it, where it's the loggers who are Nancy Eve Cohen here at NEPM has reported on where they are in all of this, and her reporting points out that there hasn't been a new state logging contract, RFP, since 2022. So people who are relying on that work are at a standstill right here while we look at whether or not to cut or how much to cut in all three of these areas. In North Adams in particular there, I know the public comment closed on October 1st. And as you mentioned, the protesters were successful in getting the herbicide scrapped from that plan. But they're still pushing here. There's an online petition. Over 1,700 people have signed it. What else are they hoping for? A full stop, or would they compromise?
Yeah, no. The city is supposed to receive this cutting plan, which is going to specifically say like where they're cutting and why. I mean, today was the day that I was given as an estimate, but I checked with the mayor yesterday. They haven't gotten it yet. The thing is with this plan, I mean, the local group that's trying to stop this, Save Notch Forest, they're going to file an appeal whenever this plan comes, and they're going to try and get it thrown out, kind of no matter what is in there, because they don't want any cutting whatsoever.
Well, certainly this issue is not going to stop anytime soon. These plans, as I understand it from your and Heather's reporting, if logging does happen, we're talking about a few more months, right? When might cutting begin?
Yeah, no, I mean, October Mountain is a little more uncertain, but in terms of Mount Washington and North Adams, Notch Reservoir, those could both start before the end of the year.
So something that you will keep watching there at the Berkshire Eagle, and we will keep bringing you back to talk about for sure. I'm going to have us move. Thanks, Son. I'm going to have us move on to some reporting that Sarah Robertson did for the Montague Reporter. And you're up bright and early today following a meeting last night in Turners Falls, Sarah. You attended for the Montague Reporter, and we'll get to those details on that meeting shortly. But the meeting was there to, as I understand from your reporting, to share the proposed details of relicensing of two of the largest hydropower projects in Massachusetts. We're talking about the Turners Fall Dam and then the Northfield Mountain Pumped Storage Facility. To quote my favorite paragraph in your report, since 2012, a dizzying cycle of comments, applications, studies, peer reviews, appeals, feedback, negotiations, and agreements has taken place regarding First Light's right to continue to use water from the Connecticut River to generate electricity. First Light is currently operating on an extended license here. It lapsed in 2018. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that's a mouthful, or FERC, has allowed those extensions. What has First Light said, Sarah, about the need for this project and the energy that it provides the area?
Well, First Light believes that they should keep providing power and that these infrastructure projects exist, and they've existed for a very long time. And they've spent a lot of time and energy negotiating the terms under which they should continue to do that. The public hearing last night was part of the state's water quality certificate hearing process, where they're going to determine the further conditions. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has issued these settlement agreements, and now the state has 1 year to review those terms and maybe even impose their own conditions to decide under which the Turners Falls Dam and the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Facility can continue to operate.
Because as I understand it, the license really is just a fancy word for terms of agreement here on how the water resource is used in that region. So we think license like, oh, it's a thing we get handed, but it's really important for people in the region because it's incredibly nuanced and it looks at things like how much water is held back and a lot of other things that I read in your reporting. What are some of the concerns that people have about these terms so far?
Yeah, well, conceptually, it's like really interesting because these facilities have existed since before the Clean Water Act was invented. So we don't.
And that's the 70s.
Yeah, that was in the 70s. So we don't know what an unobstructed, completely healthy river looks like under these terms, but we are trying to kind of strike a middle ground here. So one of the really interesting questions we heard last night was like, what degree of fish death and habitat destruction is acceptable under these licenses? Like the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station, the way it operates is it sucks water up to the top of Northfield Mountain and then pumps it back down when it is financially advantageous to do so and when the energy grid needs it. And in the process, it kills a lot of fish. And so under the current license, it's clearly okay that some fish are dying. And under the new one, it's proposed that they're going to do more measures to avoid entrapment, both at Northfield Mountain and at the Cabot Station and the Station 1 where the water comes out. But there were people there saying, if you're the Mass Department of Environmental Protection and these facilities are killing fish, deny the permit until they can guarantee that there's no fish being killed. But that's not practical.
And I was just going to say, and that might not be an unrealistic, well, it might not be an unreasonable request for some people. It might not be all that realistic. I know that State Senator Joe Comerford and State Reps Natalie Blais,
who were both there,
Daniel Carey, and Mindy Dahm have all weighed in on this, and they wrote a joint letter, quoting here, "We wish to emphasize that ultimately First Light profits from the use of a public resource, the Connecticut River, which is important in many ways beyond the production of energy. First Light has operated under a temporary license since 2018, delaying its implementation of critical and overdue environmental measures possible with this relicensing." So clearly this has caught the attention of the state officials in the region too. Now, following the meeting last night, where do we go from here?
Well, they are going to continue to assess. There were a lot of unanswered questions, one of which was in the last couple weeks, I think it was in August, the Connecticut River Conservancy did a study that found evidence of sturgeon above the Turner's Falls Dam. And that's an endangered species, which could really complicate the process. But Mass DP was unable to answer that question, and they're saying that it's still under consideration. And so they're going to continue taking evidence. They are taking in public comments and considering what the conditions might be, and that a decision is expected by April 22nd.
And there was actually one other thing I wanted to pivot back to because that stood out to me in your reporting, and it was that if it's found that First Light's operations harm the ecosystem, there are people advocating saying the state and federal agencies really should be able to step in here. But as I understand it, did I understand correctly from your reporting that the state and federal agencies have sort of already signed away that right to a certain extent?
There were settlement agreements. So, there are nonprofits that signed these. There are recreational companies and also some state agencies like the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. These settlement agreements will, I think to quote last night, will be heavily considered in the license terms, but they do not need to be. But one thing the Mass DEP official said last night is if there is too much of a difference between these, they risk First Light appealing and a lawsuit that could drag on for several more years, during which time the river will continue to be used under the current terms.
And we're taking our time with this, I assume, because this permit is not something that's a 5-year permit. It could be as long as much as 50 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, it could be as long as 50 years like this last one was. But one thing that Senator Comerford, Natalie Blais are advocating for is a shorter license because science is evolving and our understanding of the ecosystems is evolving a lot. And so in 50 years, who knows where climate change is going to be or how we need to manage the river maybe perhaps differently.
And I don't know about you, but people recreate on the river. Outside of the environmental issues here, there's a whole economy tied to use of the river. Anybody heading out to the river anytime soon on the panel, or are you just observing quietly?
Observing quietly. But I think it's really interesting that both this issue and what we were talking about with Sten's story too, it's this matter of people feeling the feelings now, but thinking about the future of this, right? The future of logging for the forest, the future of the water for people generations from now that are going to be suffering the effects of the decisions that are made now. So I find that to be really powerful. A 50-year contract is wild to me.
Yeah, it really speaks, I think, to the importance of taking our time to get it right now, because the impacts, as we're seeing with the hurricanes in the south in these recent weeks of human caused climate change, are intensifying so many things. And there are obvious things like, there's going to be increased flooding and there's going to be increased frequencies of these hurricanes. But then there's also the less evident consequences of something like the facility in North Carolina that was hit by the hurricane that makes 60% of the IV fluids that we use in this country. So it really has such an intricate and intimate effect on so many facets of how we live and use this planet, live on and use this planet. Yeah. Appreciate all of the reporting on these very nuanced issues. We are going to head to a quick break, but stay with us because our rundowners are going to weigh in on protests in Hampshire County after a tent encampment of unhoused people are told it's time to move. And with Hispanic Heritage Month coming soon to a close, a look back at how it was marked in our region. Also, predictions, scoops, and praise. You can email the rundown at nepm.org. We'll be right back. And we're back. Welcome back to The Rundown. I am Carrie Saldo. We are back with Liz Roman, Sarah Robertson, and on the phone, Sten Spinella. We are talking this morning about safety concerns that stopped Northampton officials on Monday from enforcing a no trespass order on a tent encampment in Northampton. Now, this reporting was first broken by Brian Zayat of the Shoestring, and I know that there was some late breaking news on this morning that we found on social media.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ayu Suryawan, for pointing that out to us.
So all camps are beautiful on their social media page, posted 30 minutes ago or so at 7 a.m. this morning. Police forces came and forcibly swept the camp. This is their wording. Forcibly swept the camp with no prior warning. Residents were given less than 5 minutes to collect their things. This comes despite us, this particular group, having video footage of Caputo, I don't know who that is, setting up meetings with the camp. So basically, we're trying to set up meetings to try and resolve this issue. It seems like they've been cleared out. This is literally breaking news as of this moment, so we don't have too many details on it. But that's what's being reported.
And the larger issue that this was tied to, which happened earlier this week, was the city of Northampton had told about 10 campers who had a spot near Fitzgerald Lake in Northampton that was public property, that they could no longer be there. The city raised a few concerns. There was some pushback on whether those concerns were valid or not. So there's been some back and forth here. And on Monday, that was after several. Again, this is all reporting from Brian Zayat and also some other reporters in the area. There had been a delay. The delay was over. They needed to be out by Monday. And Monday's scene took place on largely public land. 10 campers, and according to city estimates, 60 to 100 supporters dug in and said they were not going to leave. And city leaders said, you know what? This might not be a safe decision for us to move forward with right now. And they heard from the folks there and said, we're just going to leave it be for right now. Panel, were you surprised that the city opted against moving forward with this no trespass order, especially given that it wasn't the first time they had received it?
No, I mean, not really. I think you have to assess the situation, right? Especially as police officers and the city. I know Jill Kaufman spoke with Mayor Shara, and they discussed it a little bit, and it just wasn't the right time. You don't want to forcibly, although it seems like maybe they have now done that, but at the time it seemed like maybe there more conversations had to be had, especially because some of that land is supposed to be used for Habitat for Humanity, for housing. The irony of it all, right? And Habitat for Humanity was like, hey, we don't want any part of this. Like we're willing to push our timeline back, let them stay there. We'll figure this out.
Yeah. And
I could jump in just for a
please,
second.
Sten, go ahead.
From the phone. I'm not in Northampton, but is there a sense of where the unhoused people in this encampment can go?
At this point, that is a question that still remains unanswered. As far as we know, the shelters in Northampton are at capacity. There aren't any city-run shelters there in Northampton, and then the private entities that run those are also full. And again, this challenge, or I should say, this challenge that Northampton is facing is not unique to Northampton. So unfortunately, it's a huge statewide issue in Massachusetts. It's a nationwide issue as well. Liz, you mentioned the mayor, and she did tell Jill Kaufman earlier this week that she hopes that people will leave on their own. So based on social media accounts, maybe that didn't happen this morning, but she acknowledged the significant need for housing and said while the city tries to leave unhoused people in peace, she went on to say,
this location is just not a location where people can camp, and we offer whatever assistance you will take to help find a better spot and whatever additional assistance is needed for the folks that are there.
And this speaks to your question a little bit too, Sten. The Northampton Division of Community Care has been established to connect unhoused people to resources and possibly housing. The city has pointed to that as a place where perhaps people might turn. Liz, go ahead, Sarah.
And these are people that got together. This was considered a recovery camp. These are people who probably have access services, are like on their way to like getting over substance abuse issues. And you know it's harder to get housing when you have perhaps been evicted in the past or you struggle with substance abuse issues. Like I think the nature of this can't be, and there were no drugs allowed there. That was one of the rules.
Brian Zayats reported that was one of the rules that the people who were living there agreed to amongst themselves. And it was part of what they were saying helped them to feel safe in this space. Dorla Schultz, who was a member of the encampment, was quoted in the Daily Hampshire Gazette earlier this week saying, quote, "All I'm trying to do here is exist. I'm just trying to find a place. I'm not safe in the shelters, which are already full. I've been assaulted. I've been attacked in those places." So
I just want to say I was understanding that if the shelters were full, that an encampment could be built on public land. That the only, I guess, what was keeping that from happening is that on public land you can't be there if you can't build an encampment there unless the shelters in the area are full.
I'm not entirely sure on whether or not that's allowed. I know that the city of Northampton in particular in this issue has said they're willing to be flexible. And certainly we saw a Supreme Court decision earlier this year that said people no longer have this. Essentially, cities and towns can step in these instances, when they see fit. Now, there's a standing question about how and why that applies to this section of the country, because I understand it, that Supreme Court case looked specifically at the Ninth Circuit Court, which is out in the western part of the country. But still, it remains a question and an issue here. Liz, I think you took a look at some of the statewide figures here.
Yeah, I did. I mean, this is a very hyper-local story we're discussing, but it obviously ties to a much larger issue. You know, Governor Healey's administration has been dealing with emergency shelter issues since she's taken over. And I think an interesting thing, too, is people think about emergency sheltering for, immigrants or people who are refugees coming in, but we're talking about people who are born and raised here, live in this area. Some of the numbers in 2023, there was about 19,000 people that were homeless on any given day. And I looked at some Worcester Telegram reporting, and they said that by the summertime, so this reporting was like in July, there'd been a 54% increase. So 29,000 people are considered homeless at any given time. So some of this is like on a night they can find a shelter, sometimes they can't. And then there's also the issue of chronic homelessness. So this is like living off people's couches and really not having your own permanent place to stay. So to say that between the end of 2023 and the summer of 2024, you've seen a more than 50% increase, this is obviously an issue that's affecting our state horrendously. And I don't envy the Healey administration having to deal with this, because I know there's been so many, locations opened up to try and create housing, but this is not solving the problem. I mean, we need permanent, affordable housing for people.
Yeah, it's certainly an issue we'll keep discussing here on the Rundown. I do want to move us to two quick updates, stories that we've talked about on the show in the past. And this was in July. The Republican investigations editor, Greta Yoakum, did a story about Highview in Northampton. And she reported this week that the nursing home notified staff and residents that it's closing next year. If the state approves the plan, that would happen in February. Highview is the subject of a series published by the Republican in July. And it was one of the most fined facilities in Massachusetts by the federal government in the past few years. The state's Executive Office of Health and Human Services ranks its overall performance in the bottom 1% in the Commonwealth. So there's an update there. And then just a quick clarification. Last week, a complete pivot here from very hard, distressing news to something frivolous and fun. Last week, we discussed Project Skydrop and the fact that the treasure was found in Wendell State Forest. Now, Dan Leonard, the guy who found the prize, has done several interviews in the eastern part of the state, and I heard him say that he is up for claiming that $86,000 Bitcoin prize if he can decode the message on the trophy. There had been reports that he wasn't in it for the money. That is not correct. So I felt like I had to correct the record here.
That's correcting a bit of my reporting too, because I covered that story. I walked around the Wendell State Forest the day that it was found, and I saw people from Connecticut and New York. I saw a license plate from Minnesota, and there were more people in the forest that day than ever before.
People were here for it. Yeah. That's for sure. Liz, I want to move on to Hispanic Heritage Month. It's coming to a close October 15th. I want to take a quick look back at sort of different ways it was marked. I know Mass Live did a big series highlighting people from the Latino community across the state, and you for NEPM looked at the Mi Museo Committee's Latino Arts Festival. Now the festival's wrapped up, but their work continues. What are the committee's goals?
Yeah, so they really want to get Latino families and really just access for everyone everyone, but specifically Mi Museo means my museum in Spanish. So what they're looking to do is get people to come into the museum and feel like it's accessible to them. So it's not just something that you go on a school trip with or something fancy that people do, but it's something that you can go with your kids and you can look at the art and experience it. And they've had a lot more interactive spaces in the regular art museum, not just in the kids museum now, so that people can feel welcome, like it's something that belongs to them, not only in the city but in Western Massachusetts as a whole. So they're doing great work. And shout out to Mass Live for doing this Hispanic leaders. I was in it this year, which was really fun.
Congratulations.
But I was there along with like Gladys Oyola Lopez, who's the first Puerto Rican election commissioner of the city of Springfield, Ed Casey, who's in Holyoke doing amazing work with youth for the sheriff's department. Just a lot of really cool people. I think it's a nice initiative that they're doing. So
I got a little curious because the dates of Hispanic Heritage Month are the 15th of September to the 15th of October. And I took a little look, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the reason that the dates, we usually think of like the beginning of the month to the end of the month. There are several, as I understand it from the Census Bureau, several dates of significance for countries, Spanish-speaking countries across the world between those dates.
Yeah, like a lot of independence like efforts.
Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, celebrating their anniversaries for independence during those times. So a beautiful celebration here in the 413. All right, well, I will move us on to my favorite portion of the show where we talk about scoops, predictions, or praise, where I have you dish on a story you might be working on, make a little prediction about the week's news perhaps, or lavish some praise on reporting that you saw, read, and want to shout out this week. Sten Spinella, there on the phone. What do you got for us this week?
Yeah, I've got something of a scoop, although all the media in our area will be there today. The almost $16 million Greylock Glen Outdoor Center opens in about an hour. In fact, I'll run over there as soon as I shut my mouth. It'll be a multi-use space, but essentially function as a sort of ski lodge for recreationists at the Glen. I'm told local, state, and federal dignitaries will be there today. It's the first of 3 phases for the development of this property, right under Massachusetts' highest summit. Next up is a high-end campground, which could break ground on construction next year, and if all goes well, a lodge and conference center down the line. Now, I just want to say the Glen is known for its many stops and starts on development.
This is a decades in the making, and it has changed, and it's been on again, and it's been off again. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the fact that the outdoor center is actually here is a huge deal. One of the main engines of this project, though, I think this is worth pointing out, Jay Green, the town administrator at Adams, he may be leaving his post to become town manager in Lenox as early as next week. So, I mean, there's a lot riding on the success of this outdoor center and on this development as a whole. I live in Adams, and if this project goes according to plan, it would change the entire makeup of this town as we know it.
Well, we will turn back to you if anything changes, and shout out for being here and then running to your next appointment. Sarah Robertson.
My prediction is, because my head has been in the electricity and energy sphere for so long now, is the state closeout budget bill. They're debating it right now in the State House, and right now they've taken a bunch of pieces of what was going to be in the climate bill that failed to pass this session, and they put them in this closeout budget bill, and there's a lot of negotiations happening about energy infrastructure siting and battery storage and energy procurement laws. So my prediction is that those conversations are going to continue to happen, and once they do, we're going to see a lot of big changes in our state's energy policy and infrastructure building.
You heard it here first. Yeah. Liz Ramon.
Lots of traffic in Springfield this weekend. We've got the Thunderbirds' first game of the season. I'm really excited to see some of their games this season, and also the enshrinement's happening. So lots of big names descending into Springfield in the sports world.
Basketball Hall of Fame. Yeah. Well, I have the fact that the Basketball Hall of Fame is happening this weekend. I have one quick basketball story. I once met Patrick Ewing, quick brush with fame, who is in the Basketball Hall of Fame. He, during the lockout in 98-99, popped into one of my dance classes at Manhattanville College because they didn't have anywhere else to practice.
That's wild.
All right. Well, my thanks to this week's Rundowner, Sten Spinella of the Berkshire Eagle, independent journalist Sarah Robertson, and Elizabeth Roman, NEPM managing editor for news. This is The Rundown. I'm Carrie Saldo.